The Navigating Disability podcast often discusses topics including disability, injury, mental health, and mentions of sensitive issues such as trauma and suicide. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care while listening. Welcome to Navigating Disability. Today we're joined by Dr. Azi Jankovic, educator, speaker, and author of Mental Health Reclaimed. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 17, Ozzy spent over 2 decades navigating a system that didn't address the root causes of her illness. Now, through lived experience and whole person healing, she empowers others to move beyond labels and reclaim their mental health. Join us as we explore healing, hope, and the power of rewriting the mental health story. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ozzy.
Kate and Jen, thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about your life before diagnosis and after diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. So, before diagnosis, we're going back over 3 decades. I'm turning 45 this year, and I was first diagnosed with depression when I was 15. And leading up to that diagnosis, I mean, there were so many risk factors that I had that at the time nobody really knew about. So we're going back to the mid 90s. And I was really feeling down. I was really feeling a lack of motivation, disinterest, a disconnection from other people. I was feeling very much like in an existential crisis as a teenager. And looking back today, it makes complete sense as to why I felt that way. But at the time, I didn't necessarily have the validation. I was like a deep soul in just kind of like in a space that wasn't really matching up for me. And looking back, also there were several other factors that I've come to understand at the time. And I don't know what it was like in Australia at the time, but in the States, we were living in this low fat, fat free craze. It was like everything had to be low fat and fat free. And so the diet that I was consuming, I mean, it was like so high in carbohydrates and so low in fat. And it really wasn't a satiating diet. And it really wasn't a diet designed to support mental health. And my mental health, I think, declined largely in part to that. I also grew up with chronic pain. I had an injury when I was 18 months old that actually went unnoticed by the radiologist who examined my foot and the X-ray. And I grew up because my break had been untreated. I grew up with chronic pain and inflammation and arthritis, and that also was like really compounding my feelings of isolation and depression. Getting in the way of my sleep and really impeding movement, which when we can't move, it's hard to feel good. So I have a lot of empathy around anyone who struggles in that sense. When I was 15, so I went to my general practitioner, which, as I've learned, most people do this. You have about a 10 to 20-minute meeting. You fill out a survey. And from the survey results, you're prescribed a medication and told that you have like a disorder. And I was told I had depression. I fudged my answers. I was really concerned about worrying my mom. So um, I didn't I didn't mark the fives where I wanted to mark fives. I marked twos. I was really not feeling well, but I didn't want to concern anyone. Anyway, I had this moderate depression diagnosis and started on 20 milligrams of Prozac, which is, I think they start people out now on about 10, sometimes 20. And then I just steadily went up over the course of 2 years. And about 2 years later, after high school graduation, I received a bipolar diagnosis. And that just really, really derailed me. And I went on a journey. I've had this journey of ups and downs over the course of the last 28-ish years, and have learned so much and have finally arrived at a place of, gradually increasing levels of functioning and healing and really feeling my best. And that's why I want to tell this story.
Can you tell me what happened in between the diagnosis for the depression to then lead you or the GP to consider bipolar?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back, what happened to me was something that is actually not uncommon in that someone starts taking an SSRI, which is like a Prozac. There are several others in that class of drugs. And it is it's supposedly addressing serotonin reuptake, which is a neurotransmitter. And, what we know now is that most of our serotonin, the overwhelming amount of our serotonin, is actually produced in the gut. So the Prozac definitely didn't address my situation, but it gave me this increased amount of energy. And as I went up in my dose, my sleep started becoming lighter and lighter and lighter and shorter and shorter. And I had these tremendous bursts of energy. Like, I got very into bike riding these long distances, and I had all the energy in the world to socialize. And, I thought perhaps that the Prozac was like helping me function. It was sort of like a magic bullet. But over time, the energy became too much. And by the time I was graduating high school, I was also experimenting with psychedelics. And, psychedelics are also a risk factor for psychosis. I was also using cannabis. Cannabis is a risk factor for psychosis. And again, I'm not pro or anti medication or plant medicine one way or the other. I think it's very, very individualized. But in terms of my story, at that age, these things really set me off. And when I was in my final stretch of high school, I broke my leg in an impulsive skateboarding accident. I'm convinced that if I hadn't been on the 60 milligrams of Prozac, it never would have happened. But I got in this accident on the skateboard, had a compound fracture, and had my foot put back together with metal rods. And for anyone who's had metal rods in their body, that it can be uncomfortable, especially when the weather changes or if you're on an airplane or in high elevation. And after I graduated from high school, I got on a plane to take a trip over to Europe and then Israel. And on the way over to Europe, the hardware in my foot got so swollen on the airplane that I was in excruciating pain, and no amount of Advil could help me, with this pain. No amount of melatonin was putting me to sleep, and I stopped sleeping. And over the course of that trip, the lack of sleep, created symptoms of psychosis. And by about the sixth or seventh day, I was sent home from the trip. And my mom, she did everything she knew how to do at the time. She took me over to a psychiatrist, and it was my first meeting ever with a psychiatrist. And within those first 15 minutes, he took one look at me, heard my rapid speech, and, understood from my mom that I hadn't been sleeping. And he told me in that meeting that I had a lifelong condition, a disorder in my brain called bipolar. And it was genetic, according to him. And it would require a lifetime of heavy medications. And that's what he told me in that first meeting. And that is what I believed for more or less the course of 2.5 decades.
So what brought you out of that thought process? What made you look outside of the, traditional medical intervention?
Yes. So what brought me out of that thought process, it happened after quite a long time. And, I think that for me, my story went on, and I wound up in and out of 7 different psychiatric hospital stays. You call them hospitals, but some of them resemble what you would see in a movie, like these psych ward situations that go on today. And what I saw inside some of those places was so revolting in terms of the way that these human beings are treated, that I started getting this instinct, like something isn't right here. Like, I thought that the medications were supposed to help people, and I was seeing people really, really suffering. And I also began to witness myself worsening over the course of my meds, getting more and more and more. So the last thread was really in the summer of 2022. And just to premise this, I was sort of going on and off psych meds over the years. I would take certain things, I would realize, oh, this isn't working, and I would taper off the meds. But the issue that I realize now with those tapers is that they were too fast. And there's something where, oftentimes doctors will cut you like 25% of a med per week. It depends on the med. This is not my expertise, but what I've learned and what I've learned to implement is that you have to go down extremely slowly and lower a small percentage of the current dose you're taking, not a small percentage of the dose you started with. And so my tapers were so fast that I would start experiencing symptoms, which are called rebound symptoms, that happen from tapering. It's not that you have a disorder and so therefore you're having symptoms. It's that you're having symptoms that are actually side effects of the taper. And I would experience that and I'd say, oh my God, so, something's wrong with me. I better go back on medication. It would be this cycle of on and off and over and over. So in 2022, I was self-medicating with cannabis to sort of help myself with like the side effects of these tapers and to stay calm. And it was just this perfect storm of factors where I ended up taking certain antipsychotics to calm down and really not taking them with regularity. And then the cannabis, I ended up having another psychosis and wound up in the hospital here in Israel where I live and was there for about 3 weeks. And by the time I came out, I said to myself, listen, you're 40 some odd years old. You're the mother of 4 kids. Like, you do not have time for this. Like, let's figure out a way to put functioning above everything else. So my husband and I found the person in this country that's supposed to be the expert on, my condition, my situation. His expertise is in bipolar. And I went to go see him as a psychiatrist, charges a lot of money, but I said, you know what, I'm really going to invest in my health and getting better. This is number one priority. And it wasn't easy for us, but we made that choice consciously. And when I was under the psychiatrist's care, it occurred to me that he was doing everything in his power to just sedate me. I mean, I would start feeling sick from, too many antipsychotics at night. And he'd say, you know what, if you don't feel well, just take more in the morning. Meanwhile, if you take these antipsychotics at those doses in the morning, you cannot do anything. It literally feels like you're wearing 100-kilo backpack. You have cotton mouth. You can barely speak. I mean, I could barely understand what was happening on a Netflix TV show, let alone have a conversation. It was revealed to me over the course of my care with this doctor that he had been prescribing me 2 drugs that were contraindicated. And it was because we have a socialized healthcare system here. So my GP saw the prescription. She caught it in time. And when I confronted the doctor, he completely gaslit me, told me I'm a difficult patient and he's going to fire me. And I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. So I realized after that experience that the medications were making me ill. And I started a very slow taper. I don't think it was slow enough from what I understand today, but I started going off and I was very depressed. This was very, very hard. It was a very low point in my life. I didn't know if I'd ever get my functioning back. Antipsychotics, they're dopamine blockers. So they take away every ounce of motivation and satisfaction that you have. It's a miserable existence to talk about disability. I mean, I was disabled beyond belief. I had something called akathisia, which is this, they say it's rare. I don't think it's as rare as people think that it is. I think oftentimes it happens, people don't know what it is, but you feel like you need to keep moving, like you need to walk, you need to pace, you need to move your limbs, but at the same time, you're exhausted. So it feels like this internal fight with yourself. And I really wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. So I was dealing with that. In any case, I realized, you know what, this is not, I just went to the best so-called bipolar doctor and it was the worst possible experience. I also realized that he himself was not a model for health. I ran into him about a year later at my gym. I got very, very into fitness over the course of seeking out alternatives. And when I noticed him at the gym, I also noticed it was like his first time in the gym. And he happens to be very obese. And I don't know the specifics of his situation, but what I realized in seeing him there was that he couldn't guide me through something he himself hadn't experienced or didn't know about. You know, he knew all of the codes in the DSM and all of the numbers and all of the different names of the medications. And that was what he'd been practicing for decades. he didn't necessarily believe in the power of fitness from what I was observing from, he never mentioned fitness. He never mentioned sunlight. He never mentioned nutrition. And I know today that these are all really, really crucial factors that can be just as, if not more important than medications. So it was a really eye-opening experience with that particular doctor. And it just went on from there. The more I learn, the more I discover how these drugs became so prevalent. And, in terms of disability, there's a lot of research out around the rising rates of disability, mental health related disability, that are literally in line with the rates that prescription meds have increased over the years.
Yeah.
And I believe it's like even 40-fold, more than that, since depending on the diagnosis, since the late 80s when Prozac was invented. We see a direct connection between the rates of disability and the prescriptions being prescribed. Robert Whitaker in Anatomy of an Epidemic really exposes that fully and with the numbers, and it's really mind-blowing. So my eyes were opened. I was super compliant. I was always like the kid in school who wanted to please the teacher and get the good grade. And that's how I operated in the system of psychiatry for, over 2 decades, until I had that absolute wake-up call that, what, you've got one life. And if you want to function, you've got to find a new path.
And unfortunately, once your eyes are open, it's very hard to go back to what.
Yeah, because you question everything, don't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, everything.
Yeah.
I've got so many questions for you, Ozzy, about, I don't even know where to start. So do you consider the bipolar diagnosis to be correct?
I don't believe that the bipolar diagnosis has a tremendous amount of credibility, in the sense that, yes, we can observe people having symptoms of mania. We also can understand what causes those symptoms of mania, and it's not anything having to do with like a genetic lifelong disorder. Perhaps some people have a predisposition to becoming manic. That being said, just because someone is manic doesn't mean that they're going to have a prolonged period of depression, especially if the symptoms of mania are addressed early on enough. I understand mania now in a few different ways. I think there are several pathways, in and out of all of these different symptoms. But no, I don't believe that I have a disorder. I don't believe, I really don't give the DSM too much credit, in all honesty. I think that it's a really conveniently packaged system of labeling people so that people can be medicated. There's a very clear connection between these diagnoses and the drug industry over decades, bankrolling the validity of these diagnoses. And I don't subscribe to it. I do think, Kate and Jenn, that if someone receives a diagnosis and that is going to open their eyes to, say their needs, and then they're going to have their needs met, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But for me, I know that thinking, if I was sad over the years thinking, oh gosh, I'm just bipolar, it did nothing to help me. It made me feel ashamed. It by and large, the diagnosis bipolar, schizophrenia, it evokes fear. It really invokes fear in someone who has that diagnosis, or people who who hear the word. Even we just understand there's a lot of fear and unpredictability around those words. And no, so I think that, as time goes on, we're going to have a really different understanding of what quote unquote bipolar is. What was that?
Are you on medication now?
I am on a very miniscopic dose of Seroquel, which is an antipsychotic. I can show you my pills. They're so tiny. They're the smallest dose you can purchase at the pharmacy. And I have a knife. I have a kitchen knife in my closet where I chop off a little bit every week. And I will tell you, ladies, I cannot get off of this last pill. It is the hardest. It's so hard to taper off this last pill. Just for reference for anybody listening, Seroquel is an antipsychotic, and they say that a lot of psychiatrists will say that people with mania need it long term. A lot of elderly people are given antipsychotics. It's a sedative, so it's really convenient in nursing homes to give old people who are distressed this medication. A lot of children, unfortunately, are being prescribed these drugs for tantrums and aggressive behavior, even though they're antipsychotic. Again, they're sedatives, but they have very, very severe side effects. I was borderline diabetic 2 years ago, and I was taking, at the time, I would take 300 in the morning and 400 at night. It was like this massive dose. And now I'm down to 25. So it's a fraction of what I was taking. Back then I was taking several other things as well, believe it or not. But this last piece, I'm telling you, if I go down from like 12 and a half to like 9.5, I will not sleep through the night. So I'm like struggling so hard to get off this teeny tiny last dose, but I'm also not beating myself up over it. I mean, I work with a functional medicine doctor who's explained to me, like, it's such a low dose, the effects are probably negligible. But just for myself, like seeing how far my health has improved since I started lowering, I'd like to go off.
Yeah. And how is, through all your challenges and hospital admissions and things like that, how has your family, your support network coped with it and supported you through it all?
Yeah, so we live in Israel, and our family is in my family, my parents are in California. When we lived in California, the first time I went in was in 2012. And what happened in 2012 was that I have a little bit of like this high achiever tendency. For anyone listening who can kind of relate with that, when you have those tendencies, it can be really easy to overdo it. And at the time I was 32, I had a prescription for Ritalin. I had just gone back to get my doctorate in education. I was working full time, the mom of 3, trying to volunteer in the community. I had just taken on way too much. And I thought that Ritalin would be this magic pill so that I could sleep, instead of 8 hours a night, I could sleep 6. I could, focus on reading, my homework assignments and writing my papers. It really, really backfired. We had a stressful situation in the family. A relative died. There was just a lot of stress surrounding that situation, in combination with the Ritalin dose that was like increasing and increasing, and my sleep that was decreasing and decreasing. I wound up psychotic and in a psych ward for the very first time. And it was an extremely scary incident. I ended up being taken there actually by the police and with an ambulance, which is what happened in the year 2012 in LA. If you called mental health services, they would dispatch the police. Very, very traumatizing experience, very scary. To be treated like a criminal when you're just ill is like, it makes no sense. But in any case, at that time, both my mom and my mother-in-law came and stayed with the kids while I was away to help my husband. And when I came home, I was like bedridden for months. I could barely function, and I had to get extra help at home. There were certain people in the community who would, take my kids on play dates, but it was hard. It was a lot on my husband. Over the years, my husband's really he's like Superman. He's taken on so much because of, my high level of needs. I don't even want to say disability, but like just the high needs levels, the high need level over the years. It's been rough. It's been really rough. And there were periods where I really couldn't show up for my kids to like, school events or parent teacher conferences or even to the dinner table. But we're in a good place now. Like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We got through it. I think it made us stronger as a family. And, I'll say now that my teenagers, I have 3, I have a almost 21-year-old, almost 17-year-old, and a 15-year-old. And I have another one who's younger, but the teens, the older ones, if they hear of someone with a mental health situation, they'll always come and talk to me about it. They'll always share what's going on with me because they know that I understand. And my girls have even expressed interest in like going into the field in some capacity.
Amazing. Has there
Yeah.
ever been a time when you felt like giving up? It was all too hard and you just didn't want to go on?
Oh my gosh, I'll be really honest. Like when people have suicidal ideations, I get it. I really get it. I can remember feeling, the last time I got out of the hospital and I was seeing that highly regarded bipolar doctor who was just drugging me into an oblivion. I wanted to die. I was in such a dark place. And it was literally like watching a TV that's just pure static. Like life felt like static. My senses were totally overwhelmed. I'd wake up in the morning and I would just look forward to going to sleep at night. But when I was sleeping, I would have nightmares and it was so, so hard. I just didn't know if I was ever going to get better. And I really did feel hopeless. I'm a person of faith. I do rely on my faith a lot. So I would just go outside of my room and pray. And at the time, I couldn't even read the words from a prayer book. I couldn't think so well. I would just lay on the floor and I would just, like I was facing the hills of Jerusalem, not far from my home. And I would just like lay on the floor and put my head on the floor and just say, help me, help me, help me. That was my prayer. And like one day, as I kept repeating this like mantra, I heard those words speaking to me. And I felt like it was God, maybe if people don't use the word God, the universe. I felt this voice saying to me, help me. And it gave me pause. And I thought to myself, what can I do with what I've already been through and learned to help other people? And somehow that shift was like a crack in the matrix. It was like this, oh my gosh, I know things that might be able to help other people. And it was even the pathway for me to realize that the treatment was causing my symptoms.
And that's scary, isn't it? Because you go to them for help and it can be detrimental. That's scary.
It sounds like you've heard this before. It sounds like you understand what can go on. Yeah, it's incredibly scary, and the psychiatrist, I keep seeing him at the gym. And I mean, he's still just he was wearing a shirt that said, I love psychopharmacology last week.
Oh,
And I was like, I'm just in shock when I see him because I wonder, like, is he helping anyone? Like, is anyone helped by this system?
No,
I don't
following
know.
the script.
yeah.
What was that?
He's just following the script that he's been
I
told.
don't know. Like, I'm so curious. Like, if for these psychiatrists who've spent decades doing this, like, have they seen any good results from these medications? I'm really skeptical. I really, really am.
And I think a lot of people are. And it's later more for some because in Australia we have a term, and Kate will laugh when I say it. We have our aha moments when you put everything into perspective and you go, oh right, okay, now I get it. And I think we're slowly getting to that point, or people are in the community that they're opening their eyes just that little bit wider.
Are you, Jen and Kate, are you hearing stories of iatrogenic harm, like psych injury from psych meds? Is this something you hear about often in terms of, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a sad state of affairs, and I think it's global. It's not just, yeah, and it's sad because people are looking for help. That's all they're looking for, and to be heard. And they're not being heard, they're just being medicated.
I think a lot of people are being scared into
Yeah.
what the government, the big farmers, all that
Yeah.
want, rather
And
than
look, it's to each their own, right? You make the decision
absolutely.
and what's best for you, and we have no judgment whatsoever. But a lot of the landscape now are really looking, since COVID as well, I think, people are looking more into things rather than go, oh, yes, well, you're telling me that that's the right path, so I'll do it.
Asking
There's
more
more
questions.
questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so important that we do. I mean, I'm still discovering so much about medication that I didn't know before. When I was diagnosed, the drugs I was given had never been tested on people my age. These psych meds have never been tested for sexual side effects in young people. And yet, 30% of women are taking SSRIs. And there are serious side effects that have been discarded. These studies that don't have, positive results are buried. And most of the studies are very short term. And yet we as patients are told that we need to take these drugs forever. And so I think it's really important for people to have the transparency when it comes to a few things. Have these drugs been studied? If so, on which populations? For how long? What were the results? Are there other studies with other results that I'm not seeing? And, what alternatives are there to medications? I find it to be so fascinating. I hear from people all the time that are prescribed a pill without ever checking their vitamin D levels or, like really, really basic things like looking at their nutrition or looking at the amount of exercise they're getting in the day, or are they eating, the healthy fats, and are they getting enough protein, and how's their blood sugar? Really, really basic things I think that we can look at before we go down the drug route. And again, I'm not a medical doctor and this is not medical advice, but I believe it should be common knowledge.
And I believe that it should be the first step before going straight to drugs.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Ozzy, what do you hope for the future, for not only just yourself personally, but also for the community?
I hope and pray for the future that we will have a consciousness that our mental health is based on our physiology, our psychology. It is based on our sense of purpose, and it is based on the connectedness and safety we have with people in our lives. So I call them the 4 Ps. It's a biopsychosocial spiritual model of mental health. And I hope and pray that schools from preschool, from, early education, and even from the education that expecting parents get before they have babies, that they learn to become empowered, to take practical steps to safeguard themselves against these mental health symptoms. Because so many of the steps we can take and the things that we can do will enhance our lives and really protect us from these dangerous symptoms. And I think that we can incorporate so much into our school systems that can really empower the youth and the next generation to make healthier choices, to put their health first, and to really, really flourish.
I love that.
Yeah. And
I'm so glad.
And you're so right, it starts when you're young. Having that, the structure and the education, could you imagine what they're going to be like when they're older, understanding their own bodies and their own choices and things like that? I think that's exciting. And I hope it does come to fruition, to be honest.
Yeah, I do too. And I want to thank both of you for the work that you're doing and, for pursuing this passion project, this podcast, and really shining a light on this societal issue that we are really all in together. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's really opened our eyes up to so many things that we weren't aware of. And it's really exciting. The only hesitation that I have about what you've said is that I actually question whether the higher up people want us to have
Oh, yes, Kate.
want us
I am
the
I am
knowledge.
so with you. I will say something. I very much question who's controlling the narrative and the systems. I mean, in my book, I talk about, for example, in the 1950s, there were 2 Harvard scientists that were paid the equivalent of $50,000 in today's money to blame heart disease on dietary fat instead of sugar. And because they did that, dietary fat became the culprit, and people stopped eating healthy things like avocado and nuts and seeds, and thereby their mental health suffered. Well, what happened when people started looking at sugar as something that's healthy and fat as something that's bad, we had the birth of chronic disease around the world. And, if you don't have those dietary fats, your body has a glucose spike much more quickly because fat slows the glucose spike. And so people's blood sugar became so unstable that this drove chronic disease. Dr. Casey Means, she's a medical doctor. She just became the Surgeon General in the States. And she was tapped by RFK. And, this is beyond politics. So whatever you think about politicians and politics, I discovered Casey Means before this, and I read her book, Good Energy. And I will say that this is her philosophy that the glucose issue, the sugar issue, has created chronic disease. And I believe that she will be a change in terms of policy. There will be a change, but it's scary stuff. It's really scary stuff. And I understand your skepticism. And I think that it'll be people like you, it'll be people like us who we have the independent media sources. We're having these real conversations, real stories about real people. That'll be the data that collectively drives the change.
I hope you're right. What does the future hold for Azi? Now, you've mentioned a book.
Yes. Okay. I just got I don't know if I'll be able to show you with here it is. I just got my book. So this is my book, Mental Health Reclaimed. It just came yesterday. This is my advanced copy.
Oh, how exciting.
It'll be out on June 8th. And it's a simple guide to thriving beyond labels or limits. So it goes over those 4 P's that I mentioned before: the physiology, the psychology, the purpose, and the people. And it's really it is partially my story, but it's my story interwoven with the lessons that I've learned that have helped me to heal. And I've also shared much of the research and, different stories over time that I've learned that have shaped my worldview and informed my healing. And my hope and my prayer with the book is that I can save people the decades of struggle that I went through. The decades of struggling, so much, unfortunately, money that I had to, spend on the doctors and the learning and the treatments and every single lesson that I learned through all of it. It's in here. And this is my gift to anybody who is struggling, who needs help, information, hope.
Oh, I can't read it.
Yeah, and that's what this is all about as well. It's just providing that hope and that connection and the open communication, because we're all, there's so much behind closed doors and smoke and mirrors and things like that. So we want this to be raw so people can go, that's what I was thinking, and let them be validated as well, because half the time you're not validated in the community.
That is, Jenn, it's so huge what you just said, the fact that people aren't validated. And I think that a lot of people will experience symptoms and side effects. Like I had so many side effects from psych meds, and I would go see the psychiatrist and I would complain and they would say, oh, I think you need this other drug, rather than, oh, that's a common side effect of this medication. I'm not even sure if the psychiatrist knew that, in all honesty. I don't even know if they're educated to that degree. I think that some of the facts are actually kept from the medical doctors themselves.
And they've been on the drug, they have no experience.
Yeah.
And everything you're saying, it's like we need the validation. It's really, really important.
Yeah.
Azi, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We will put all of your links up on social media for people to reach out if they see it. Thank you.
Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you so much for having me, Kate and Jenn, and keep up the incredible work you're doing.
Thanks, Azi. It's appreciated.